December 1980. The Cold War was at its peak. Across Europe, military forces remained on constant alert. Nuclear weapons stood ready. Tensions between East and West shaped everyday life. In the quiet countryside of Suffolk, England, two American-operated air bases sat surrounded by dense woodland. RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge were among the most strategically important military installations in Europe. Security was tight, personnel were highly trained, and nobody expected that over several nights, those same personnel would become involved in one of the most controversial UFO cases ever recorded. It began shortly after midnight. Security officers noticed unusual lights descending through the trees beyond the base perimeter. Their first assumption was simple: an aircraft must have crashed. Such incidents required immediate investigation. A small team was dispatched into the darkness. They expected twisted metal, smoke, fire. Instead, they reported something else entirely, something that would spark debate for decades to come. More than 40 years later, the Rendlesham Forest Incident remains one of the world's most famous UFO mysteries. Tonight, we follow the events exactly as they unfolded. The witnesses, the evidence, the explanations, and the question that still has no universally accepted answer. What happened in Rendlesham Forest? The forest was quiet that night. Tall pine trees stretched into the darkness. The winter air was cold and still. Visibility was limited. As the security team moved deeper into the woods, the lights became more visible. They appeared to flash between the trees, blue, white, red, strange colors moving where no vehicle should have been. The men continued forward. Among them were Airman First Class John Burroughs and Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston. Both men would later provide detailed accounts of what they claimed to have witnessed. At first, they believed they were approaching a downed aircraft. But as they got closer, the shape emerging from the darkness looked nothing like a plane. According to Peniston, a triangular object stood among the trees. It appeared metallic, smooth, black in color, roughly the size of a small vehicle. Strange lights moved across its surface, yet there was no sound, no engine noise, no smell of fuel. No indication that the object had arrived through any conventional means. Peniston later claimed he approached within a few feet, close enough to touch it, close enough to examine its surface. He described symbols etched into the metal, shapes unlike any military markings he recognized. The symbols appeared illuminated by the object's glow. Fascinated and confused, he reached out. His hand touched the surface, cold, smooth, solid. For a brief moment, everything seemed still. Then the object began to change. Lights intensified, colors shifted, and suddenly, according to witnesses, the craft moved. It rose through the trees, silent, effortless, accelerating into the darkness before disappearing from view. The forest returned to silence. The men stood frozen, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Had they encountered a secret military aircraft, some kind of experimental technology, or something far stranger? Back at the base, reports were filed, yet many officers remained skeptical. Extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, and at that moment, evidence was limited. But the story was far from over, because 2 nights later the lights returned. News of the incident spread throughout the base. Conversations filled hallways and offices. Some personnel dismissed the encounter immediately. Others were curious. A few believed something genuinely unusual had occurred. One of those individuals was Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt. Halt served as deputy base commander. He was not known for wild stories. He was a respected officer with significant responsibilities. Determined to investigate personally, Halt assembled a team. On the night of December 28th, they entered Rendlesham Forest carrying flashlights, measuring equipment, and a portable tape recorder. What happened next would become the most famous part of the case. As the group moved through the forest, Halt began recording his observations in real time. The tape still exists today. Unlike witness statements written after an event, the recording captured reactions as events unfolded. The men reached the area where the original sighting had occurred. There, they reported finding unusual marks on the ground. Several depressions appeared arranged in a triangular pattern. Damage to nearby branches was also noted. Radiation readings were taken. Some measurements reportedly exceeded surrounding background levels. To believers, this suggested physical evidence. To skeptics, the readings remained unremarkable. The debate would continue for decades. Then something appeared in the distance, a red light moving among the trees. The team watched carefully. The light seemed to pulse. It moved slowly, then quickly. At times, it appeared to vanish completely before reappearing elsewhere. Halt described the object as resembling an eye, a glowing red center surrounded by darkness. As the team observed, the object appeared to move through the forest, then upward into the night sky. The men followed. None of them fully understood what they were witnessing. Yet everyone knew something unusual was happening. And according to several members of the team, the strangest events were still ahead. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt stood quietly among the trees. The cold December air drifted through the forest. Around him, members of his team scanned the darkness with flashlights. Only hours earlier, many of them had doubted the stories spreading around the base. Now they were witnessing something for themselves. The red light remained visible in the distance. It appeared to pulse slowly, bright, dim, bright again. At times it seemed stationary. And then, without warning, it shifted position, moving between the trees with unusual speed. Halt spoke into his recorder. His voice remained calm, but there was a noticeable sense of confusion. The object did not behave like any conventional aircraft. There was no engine noise, no navigation lights, no obvious explanation. As the team continued watching, the red light suddenly broke apart. At least, that was how several witnesses described it. It appeared to fragment into multiple smaller lights. Then those lights vanished. For a moment, the forest became completely dark once again. The men exchanged uncertain glances. Nobody seemed willing to say what they were thinking. Military training encourages observation, facts, evidence. Yet what they were seeing seemed difficult to explain through ordinary means. Then another light appeared, this time higher in the sky, white in color, brilliantly bright. The object moved slowly across the horizon, then stopped. Halt immediately noticed something unusual. The light appeared to be watching them, following their movements, tracking them. Whenever members of the team shifted position, the light seemed to react. At first, nobody spoke. They simply observed. Then the object began moving again. It accelerated, stopped, changed direction, hovered. Movements that many witnesses later claimed were unlike those of any aircraft they knew. Through binoculars, the object appeared even stranger. Some observers reported seeing a dark center surrounded by a glowing halo. Others described rapidly changing colors: red, blue, white, green. The descriptions varied, yet everyone agreed on one thing. Something unusual was visible in the sky that night. As the team continued their observations, reports began arriving from other locations. Personnel elsewhere on the base were also seeing lights. Some described bright objects hovering above the forest. Others reported strange movements across the horizon. What had started as a localized investigation was becoming a larger event. Halt continued recording every observation, every movement, every unexpected development. The tape recorder captured the atmosphere of the moment, the uncertainty, the excitement, the confusion. Unlike written reports prepared days later, these recordings documented reactions in real time. And because of that, they would become one of the most important pieces of evidence associated with the case. Suddenly, one of the observers pointed upward. Another light had appeared, this one directly above them, bright and silent, hanging motionless in the sky. Several members of the team watched in disbelief. According to later accounts, beams of light seemed to descend toward the ground, thin shafts of illumination extending from above. One witness compared them to laser beams. Others simply described columns of light. Whatever they were, they appeared unusual enough to leave a lasting impression. The forest around them remained silent. No aircraft noise, no helicopter rotors, no indication that a conventional vehicle was responsible. The lights remained visible for several minutes. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished. The sky returned to darkness. The investigation slowly came to an end, but for many of the men present, the questions were only beginning. Back at the base, conversations continued long into the night. Witnesses compared observations. Officers reviewed reports. Some individuals believed they had witnessed technology beyond human understanding. Others remained skeptical. Extraordinary claims required extraordinary proof. And despite multiple witnesses, definitive proof remained elusive. Yet one thing was clear: the incident could not simply be ignored. Lieutenant Colonel Halt believed the events deserved official documentation. In January 1981, he drafted a memorandum describing the unusual occurrences. The document was sent to the British Ministry of Defense. It outlined the sightings, the ground markings, the radiation measurements, and the strange lights observed in the sky. At the time, Halt likely had no idea his memo would become one of the most famous UFO-related documents ever released. Years later, researchers would analyze every sentence, every detail, every observation. Supporters viewed it as powerful evidence. Skeptics saw it as an honest report documenting a misunderstanding. The debate had begun, and it has never truly ended. Over the following months and years, additional witnesses came forward. Some expanded upon their original accounts. Others revealed details they had previously kept private. Stories began circulating beyond military circles. Newspapers picked up the case. UFO researchers launched investigations. Television documentaries followed. With each passing year, the Rendlesham Forest Incident grew larger. What had begun as a strange series of events in a quiet forest was becoming an international mystery. But as interest increased, so did scrutiny. Investigators started asking difficult questions. Were the witnesses mistaken? Could natural phenomena explain what they saw? Had military personnel unintentionally misinterpreted ordinary lights under unusual circumstances? Or had something genuinely extraordinary occurred in the Suffolk forest during those cold December nights? To answer those questions, researchers would need to examine the evidence itself, the witness testimony, the physical traces, the radiation readings, the recordings, and perhaps most importantly, the alternative explanations, because before deciding whether Rendlesham was Britain's greatest UFO mystery, we first need to understand what the evidence actually shows. More than 4 decades have passed since the events in Rendlesham Forest. Yet one question continues to divide researchers, investigators, and witnesses alike. What evidence actually exists? Was there truly something unknown in the forest that winter? Or has the story grown larger with time? To answer that question, we need to examine the evidence itself, not the rumors, not the headlines. The evidence. The first piece of evidence often discussed is the witness testimony. Unlike many UFO reports involving a single observer, Rendlesham involved multiple military personnel, men trained to observe and report unusual activity, security policemen, supervisors, officers, individuals whose duties required attention to detail. Supporters of the case argue that this fact alone makes Rendlesham different. These were not random members of the public. They were trained servicemen operating at a military installation during the Cold War. Yet critics point out that training does not make someone immune to mistakes. Even experienced observers can misinterpret unfamiliar sights under difficult conditions, especially at night, especially in a forest, especially when expectations begin influencing perception. Human memory is complicated. Witnesses can honestly believe they saw something extraordinary while still being mistaken about certain details. This possibility would become a central argument among skeptics. The next piece of evidence concerns the physical traces allegedly discovered at the site. During the second night's investigation, personnel reported finding 3 small depressions in the ground. The marks appeared arranged in a triangular pattern. Nearby tree branches showed signs of damage. To believers, the implications seemed obvious. Something had landed there. Something heavy enough to leave impressions in the soil. Something capable of affecting the surrounding environment. However, skeptics were unconvinced. Forests are full of natural disturbances, animal activity, vehicle tracks, fallen branches, weather-related damage. Without clear documentation taken immediately after the event, determining the true origin of those marks proved difficult. The evidence remained open to interpretation. Then there were the radiation readings, perhaps one of the most frequently discussed aspects of the case. During the investigation, members of Halt's team used a radiation detector to measure the area. According to reports, certain locations showed elevated readings compared to surrounding areas. For UFO researchers, this seemed significant. Radiation has appeared in numerous UFO stories throughout the decades. If an unusual craft had landed in the forest, some argued elevated readings might be expected. Yet once again, skeptics challenged the conclusion. The measurements were relatively low, not dangerous, not extraordinary. Some experts later suggested that the readings fell within normal environmental variations. Others noted that radiation detectors can be influenced by numerous factors: soil composition, natural background radiation, equipment limitations. In the end, the readings raised questions, but they did not provide definitive answers. Perhaps the most important piece of evidence was the recording made by Lieutenant Colonel Halt. Unlike witness accounts written after the fact, the audio tape captured events as they unfolded. Listeners could hear the voices of the observers, their reactions, their uncertainty, their attempts to understand what they were seeing. For supporters of the UFO explanation, the tape carried considerable weight. The witnesses sounded sincere, confused, genuinely puzzled by the lights they were observing. There was no indication of a joke, no suggestion of a deliberate hoax. Yet sincerity alone does not prove accuracy. A witness can honestly report what they believe they observed while still misidentifying the source. This distinction would become crucial as alternative explanations emerged. Among all proposed explanations, one appears more frequently than any other: a lighthouse, specifically the Orford Ness Lighthouse. Located several miles from the forest, the lighthouse emitted a powerful beam of light at regular intervals. Every few seconds, the beam rotated across the landscape. Researchers investigating the case noticed something intriguing. The timing of the lighthouse beam appeared remarkably similar to descriptions of the flashing lights seen in the forest. Some skeptics argued that witnesses had unknowingly observed the lighthouse through gaps in the trees. In darkness, surrounded by dense woodland, the flashing beam could potentially appear strange and unfamiliar, especially if observers believed they were searching for a crashed aircraft. Expectations can shape perception. Once the idea of something unusual enters the mind, ordinary sights can take on extraordinary significance. Supporters of the UFO theory strongly disagree. They point out that experienced military personnel would likely recognize a lighthouse. They also note that some reported observations seem difficult to reconcile with a distant, rotating beacon. The debate continues to this day. Another explanation focuses on the night sky itself. Astronomers reviewing the case noted that several bright celestial objects were visible during the incident. Among them was the star Sirius, the brightest star visible from Earth. Under certain atmospheric conditions, Sirius can appear to flash multiple colors: red, blue, green, white, particularly when viewed near the horizon. To an observer unfamiliar with the effect, the star can appear surprisingly unusual. Some researchers believe that at least some of the lights reported during the incident may have been astronomical objects mistaken for something more mysterious. Again, believers remain unconvinced. They argue that stars do not move through forests. They do not descend toward the ground. They do not appear to follow observers. And so, the disagreement persists. The deeper investigators examined Rendlesham Forest, the more complicated the story became. Every piece of evidence seemed to support multiple interpretations. Every explanation left unanswered questions. Every witness account introduced new mysteries. Was it a misunderstanding? A combination of natural phenomena and human perception? A secret military experiment? Or something entirely unknown? The answer depended largely on which evidence one considered most important. And that brings us to perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the entire case: the witnesses themselves. Because over the years, several individuals involved in the incident expanded upon their accounts. Some added remarkable new details that would make the mystery even more controversial than before. And more than 40 years have passed since the events in Rendlesham Forest. The witnesses have told their stories. Investigators have examined the evidence. Skeptics have offered explanations. Yet no theory has managed to convince everyone. Some believe the lights were nothing more than a lighthouse beam, bright stars, and a series of misunderstandings. Others remain convinced that something truly extraordinary entered the forest during those cold December nights. Whatever the truth may be, the Rendlesham Forest Incident remains one of the most compelling mysteries in modern history. A case involving military personnel, official reports, audio recordings, and questions that still remain unanswered. Deep within the forests of Suffolk, the debate continues. What did those men really see? A simple mistake? A secret military experiment? Or something beyond our understanding? The answer may never be known, but one thing is certain: the mystery of Rendlesham Forest is far from over, and perhaps somewhere among those silent trees, the truth is still waiting to be discovered.